The stench of rotting garbage permeated the air, a nauseating cocktail of decay and desperation. Amidst the mountains of discarded waste, a faint cry pierced the oppressive silence. It was a sound so out of place in this forsaken landscape that it seemed almost surreal. Caio, barely 3 months old, lay wrapped in a tattered blanket, his tiny body trembling against the cold metal of an abandoned refrigerator. His cries, once strong and demanding, had dwindled to weak whimpers. How long had he been there? Hours? Days? Time seemed to stretch endlessly in this wasteland of human indifference. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dump, transforming the piles of trash into looming monsters. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, and Caio's cries grew more desperate. He was hungry, cold, and alone, abandoned by those who should have protected him. In the distance, the sound of hooves echoed through the desolate landscape. Esperanza, a majestic brown mare, had escaped from a nearby stable. She trotted aimlessly through the outskirts of the city, her powerful muscles rippling beneath her glossy coat. As she approached the dump, her ears pricked forward, catching the faint sound of Caio's cries. Guided by an instinct she couldn't explain, Esperanza picked her way carefully through the treacherous terrain. The scent of decay assaulted her nostrils, causing her to snort and shake her head. Yet she pressed on, drawn by the pitiful sounds of distress. As Esperanza crested a hill of garbage, her eyes fell upon the source of the cries. There, nestled in the ruins of human wastefulness, lay a tiny human child. The horse's deep brown eyes widened in surprise, and she took a cautious step forward. Caio, sensing the presence of another living being, opened his eyes. Through the haze of hunger and exhaustion, he saw the enormous figure of Esperanza looming over him. For a moment, fear gripped his little heart, but as the horse lowered her head and gently nuzzled him, that fear gave way to a flicker of hope. Esperanza's warm breath washed over Caio, providing a brief respite from the biting cold. The baby reached out a tiny hand, his fingers brushing against the horse's velvety muzzle. It was a moment of connection, transcending the barriers of species, two lost souls finding each other in the most unlikely of places. As night fully enveloped the dump, Esperanza made a decision. With utmost gentleness, she used her teeth to grasp the edge of Caio's blanket. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the baby from his makeshift crib. Caio, too weak to protest, simply clung to the warmth of Esperanza's body. With her precious cargo secured, Esperanza began to navigate her way out of the dump. Each step was measured, every movement calculated to avoid jostling the fragile life she carried. The horse's powerful instincts, honed by millennia of evolution, now focused entirely on protecting this helpless human child. As they left the dump behind, Esperanza's pace quickened. She had no destination in mind, driven only by the need to find help for the baby. The lights of the city glowed in the distance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Unbeknownst to Esperanza and Caio, their journey was about to intersect with another life, one that would be forever changed by this chance encounter. For now, though, they pressed on through the night, an unlikely pair bound by circumstance and the universal language of compassion. The city streets were nearly deserted as Esperanza trotted along, her hooves echoing off the buildings. A few late-night stragglers stared in disbelief at the sight of a horse carrying a baby through the urban landscape. Most dismissed it as a hallucination, a trick of the dim streetlights and their tired minds. But one pair of eyes watched the strange procession with growing interest. Dr. Elena Suarez, a veterinarian working late at the city's animal shelter, was just locking up when she heard the distinctive sound of hoofbeats. As she turned to investigate, she was met with a sight that defied explanation. Elena's medical training kicked in, overriding her initial shock. She approached slowly, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. "Easy, girl," she murmured soothingly to Esperanza. "What have you got there?" As Elena drew closer, her eyes widened in disbelief. Nestled against Esperanza's neck, barely visible in the folds of a dirty blanket, was a human baby. The child's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. "Oh my God," Elena whispered, her heart racing. She reached out, gently taking Caio from Esperanza's grasp. The horse released her hold willingly, seeming to understand that help had finally arrived. Elena cradled Caio close, her mind whirling with questions. Where had this child come from? How long had he been alone? And how on earth had this horse found him and brought him to safety? There was no time for answers now. Caio needed immediate medical attention. Elena fumbled for her phone, dialing emergency services with shaking fingers. As she waited for the ambulance to arrive, she turned her attention to Esperanza. The horse stood quietly, her sides heaving from exertion. Elena's trained eye could see that Esperanza was exhausted, dehydrated, and in need of care herself. "You're a hero, girl," Elena said softly, stroking Esperanza's neck. "Don't worry. I'll take care of both of you." As sirens wailed in the distance, Elena made a silent vow. Whatever it took, she would unravel the mystery of this abandoned baby and his equine savior. Little did she know, this night would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge her beliefs, test her resolve, and ultimately change her life forever. The stench of rotting garbage permeated the air, a nauseating cocktail of decay and desperation. Amidst the mountains of discarded waste, a faint cry pierced the oppressive silence. It was a sound so out of place in this forsaken landscape that it seemed almost surreal. Caio, barely 3 months old, lay wrapped in a tattered blanket, his tiny body trembling against the cold metal of an abandoned refrigerator. His cries, once strong and demanding, had dwindled to weak whimpers. How long had he been there? Hours? Days? Time seemed to stretch endlessly in this wasteland of human indifference. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dump, transforming the piles of trash into looming monsters. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, and Caio's cries grew more desperate. He was hungry, cold, and alone, abandoned by those who should have protected him. In the distance, the sound of hooves echoed through the desolate landscape. Esperanza, a majestic brown mare, had escaped from a nearby stable. She trotted aimlessly through the outskirts of the city, her powerful muscles rippling beneath her glossy coat. As she approached the dump, her ears pricked forward, catching the faint sound of Caio's cries. Guided by an instinct she couldn't explain, Esperanza picked her way carefully through the treacherous terrain. The scent of decay assaulted her nostrils, causing her to snort and shake her head. Yet she pressed on, drawn by the pitiful sounds of distress. As Esperanza crested a hill of garbage, her eyes fell upon the source of the cries. There, nestled in the ruins of human wastefulness, lay a tiny human child. The horse's deep brown eyes widened in surprise, and she took a cautious step forward. Caio, sensing the presence of another living being, opened. Through the haze of hunger and exhaustion, he saw the enormous figure of Esperanza looming over him. For a moment, fear gripped his little heart, but as the horse lowered her head and gently nuzzled him, a flicker of hope. Esperanza's warm breath washed over Caio, providing a brief respite from the biting cold. The baby reached out a tiny hand, his fingers brushing against the horse's velvety muzzle. It was a moment of connection, transcending the barriers of species. Two lost souls finding each other in the most unlikely of places. As night fully enveloped the dump, Esperanza made a decision. With utmost gentleness, she used her teeth to grasp the edge of Caio's blanket. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the baby from his makeshift crib. Caio, too weak to protest, simply clung to the warmth of Esperanza's body. With her precious cargo secured, Esperanza began to navigate her way out of the dump. Each step was measured, every movement calculated to avoid jostling the fragile life she carried. The horse's powerful instincts, honed by millennia of evolution, now focused entirely on protecting this helpless human child. As they left the dump behind, Esperanza's pace quickened. She had no destination in mind, driven only by the need to find help for the baby. The lights of the city glowed in the distance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Unbeknownst to Esperanza and Caio, their journey was about to intersect with another life, one that would be forever changed by this chance encounter. For now, though, they pressed on through the night, an unlikely pair bound by circumstance and the universal language of compassion. The city streets were nearly deserted as Esperanza trotted along, her hooves echoing off the buildings. A few late-night stragglers stared in disbelief at the sight of a horse carrying a baby through the urban landscape. Most dismissed it as a hallucination, a trick of the dim streetlights and their tired minds. But one pair of eyes watched the strange procession with growing interest. Dr. Elena Suarez, a veterinarian working late at the city's animal shelter, was just locking up when she heard the distinctive sound of hoofbeats. As she turned to investigate, she was met with a sight that defied explanation. Elena's medical training kicked in, overriding her initial shock. She approached slowly, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. "Easy, girl," she murmured soothingly to Esperanza. "What have you got there?" As Elena drew closer, her eyes widened in disbelief. Nestled against Esperanza's neck, barely visible in the folds of a dirty blanket, was a human baby. The child's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. "Oh my God," Elena whispered, her heart racing. She reached out, gently taking Caio from Esperanza's grasp. The horse released her hold willingly, seeming to understand that help had finally arrived. Elena cradled Caio close, her mind whirling with questions. Where had this child come from? How long had he been alone? And how on earth had this horse found him and brought him to safety? There was no time for answers now. Caio needed immediate medical attention. Elena fumbled for her phone, dialing emergency services with shaking fingers. As she waited for the ambulance to arrive, she turned her attention to Esperanza. The horse stood quietly, her sides heaving from exertion. Elena's trained eye could see that Esperanza was exhausted, dehydrated, and in need of care herself. "You're a hero, girl," Elena said softly, stroking Esperanza's neck. "Don't worry, I'll take care of both of you." As sirens wailed in the distance, Elena made a silent vow. Whatever it took, she would unravel the mystery of this abandoned baby and his equine savior. Little did she know, this night would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge her beliefs, test her resolve, and ultimately change her life forever. The day of the meeting arrived with a sense of foreboding. Elena dressed Caio in his best outfit, a tiny blue sweater that brought out the warmth in his brown eyes. As she drove to the child services office, she found herself talking to the baby, as if he could understand the gravity of the situation. "Yeah, no matter what happens in there, Caio, I want you to know that I love you," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "We're in this together, little one." The woman claiming to be Caio's mother was already in the office when Elena arrived. Her name was Lucia Mendez, and she looked nothing like Elena had imagined. Instead of the hardened criminal she had pictured, Lucia was young, barely out of her teens, with a haunted look in her eyes that spoke of deep trauma. As soon as Lucia saw Caio, she burst into tears. "My baby," she sobbed, reaching out trembling hands. I'm so sorry." Elena felt a confusing mix of emotions, sympathy for this clearly troubled young woman and a fierce protectiveness towards Caio. She hesitated, then slowly approached Lucia, allowing her to touch Caio's hand. Maria Gonzalez facilitated the meeting, her calm presence a stabilizing force in the emotionally charged room. "Lucia," she began gently, "can you tell us what happened? Why did you leave Caio in the garbage dump?" Lucia's story unfolded in halting, tear-filled sentences. She had been a victim of human trafficking, brought to the country with promises of a better life, only to be forced into a nightmare of exploitation. When she discovered she was pregnant, her captors had given her an ultimatum: get rid of the baby or face dire consequences. I couldn't kill my baby," Lucia whispered, her eyes never leaving Caio's face. "So I ran. I hid. But they found me. They said they would kill us both if I didn't get rid of him. I thought someone would find him quickly in the dump. I never meant for him to be alone for so long. I've regretted it every second since." Elena listened, her heart breaking for both Lucia and Caio. The story was horrific, but it explained so much. She found her anger towards Lucia dissipating, replaced by a desire to help this young woman who had faced impossible choices. "What made you come forward now?" Elena asked softly. Lucia took a deep breath. "I finally escaped. For real this time. I went to the police and told them everything. When I heard about a baby being rescued by a horse, I knew it had to be my Caio. It was like a miracle." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of Lucia's words. Maria was the first to speak. "Lucia, I want you to know that there are resources available to help you. Legal aid, counseling, job training. We can work together to build a stable environment for you and Caio." Elena felt a pang in her chest. She knew this was the right thing, the best thing for both Lucia and Caio. But the thought of letting go of the baby she had come to love as her own was almost unbearable. As if sensing her distress, Caio began to fuss. Without thinking, Elena started to sway gently, humming a lullaby she had sung to him countless times. To her surprise, Lucia joined in, her voice harmonizing perfectly with Elena's. In that moment, something shifted. Elena looked at Lucia and saw not a rival, but a fellow protector of this precious child. "We both want what's best for Caio," she said quietly. Maybe we can figure this out together." Lucia's eyes widened with hope. "You would do that?" After everything, Elena nodded, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "Caio deserves all the love and support he can get, and you deserve a chance to be the mother you wanted to be." Maria watched this exchange with a mixture of admiration and relief. "This is an unusual situation," she admitted. "But if you're both willing to work together, we might be able to arrange a joint custody agreement. It would take time and a lot of effort from both of you." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, counseling sessions, and careful negotiations. Elena helped Lucia find a job at a local community center, using her connections to vouch for the young woman's character. Lucia, in turn, threw herself into parenting classes and therapy, determined to heal and become the mother Caio deserved. Through it all, Caio thrived, surrounded by the love of two devoted women. Elena and Lucia developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by their shared love for the little boy who had brought them together. But just as things seemed to be settling into a new normal, a shadow from the past threatened to destroy everything they had built. One evening, as Elena was leaving work at the animal shelter, she noticed a car parked across the street. Something about it made her uneasy, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. As she unlocked her car, a man stepped out of the shadows. "Dr. Suarez," he called, his voice deceptively friendly. "I'd like to talk to you about Lucia Mendez and her baby." Elena's blood ran cold. She knew instinctively that this man was connected to the traffickers who had tormented Lucia. Her mind raced, trying to figure out how to protect Caio and Lucia without putting herself in danger. "I'm sorry, I don't know who you're talking about," she lied, her hand inching towards her phone in her pocket. The man's smile turned predatory. "I think you do, Doctor, and I think you're going to help us find them. Unless you want that pretty animal shelter of yours to have an unfortunate accident." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She realized with a sinking feeling that this confrontation was far from over. The battle for Caio's safety, and now for her own, was about to enter a dangerous new phase. As the man took a step closer, Elena made a split-second decision. She fumbled with her keys, deliberately dropping them on the ground. As she bent to retrieve them, she pressed the panic button on her car key fob. Instantly, her car alarm blared to life, shattering the quiet evening. The sudden noise startled the man, giving Elena the precious seconds she needed. She yanked open her car door, threw herself inside, and locked it just as the man lunged for her. With shaking hands, she started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, her tires screeching on the asphalt. As she drove, her mind raced. She needed to warn Lucia, to protect Caio. But how could she do that without leading these dangerous people straight to them? Elena realized with a sinking heart that her involvement with Caio had not only changed her life, but had now put her squarely in the crosshairs of a criminal organization. She pulled over to the side of the road, her hands trembling as she dialed Maria Gonzalez's number. As the phone rang, Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She knew that the next few days would test her in ways she had never imagined. but she was determined to protect the makeshift family she had found. Little did she know. The solution to their problems would come from an unexpected source, one that had been there from the very beginning of this extraordinary journey. Elena's frantic call to Maria Gonzalez set off a chain of events that would change everything. Within hours, Lucia and Caio were moved to a safe house, their location known only to a select few. Elena found herself caught in a whirlwind of police interviews and heightened security measures, her once peaceful life now marked by constant vigilance. Detective Javier Ortiz, a seasoned officer with the organized crime unit, took charge of the case. His weathered face and sharp eyes spoke of years spent battling the darker elements of society. As he sat across from Elena in an austere interview room, his voice was gruff but not unkind. "Dr. Suarez, I need you to understand the gravity of the situation," he began. "The organization we're dealing with is ruthless. They've managed to evade law enforcement for years, and they're not about to let Lucia's testimony bring them down." Elena nodded, her throat tight. "What can I do to help?" Detective Ortiz leaned forward. "Aren't you already doing it? By coming forward, you've given us a new lead. But I won't lie to you, you're in danger now, too. We'll need to place you under protection." The next few weeks were a blur of safe houses, unmarked police cars, and sleepless nights. Elena's work at the animal shelter was put on indefinite hold, her life reduced to a series of anonymous hotel rooms and hushed phone calls. She ached to see Caio, to hold him and make sure he was safe, but direct contact was deemed too risky. It was during this time of isolation that Elena found herself thinking more and more about Esperanza. The horse that had started it all was still at her shelter, cared for by her colleagues. In quiet moments, Elena wondered about the inexplicable bond between the animal and Caio. There was something almost mystical about how Esperanza had found the baby, how she had known to bring him to safety. One night, unable to sleep, Elena called her assistant at the shelter. "How's Esperanza doing?" she asked, desperate for a connection to her old life. "She's restless," her assistant replied. "It's the strangest thing, Dr. Suarez. She keeps going to the gate like she's waiting for someone, and she won't let anyone ride her. It's like she's saving herself for something." Those words stirred something in Elena's mind, a half-formed idea that she couldn't quite grasp. She thanked her assistant and hung up, her thoughts racing. The next morning she approached Detective Ortiz with a proposal that, even to her own ears, sounded crazy. "I think Esperanza might be able to help us," she said, watching the detective's eyebrows rise skeptically. "The horse?" he asked, clearly wondering if the stress had finally gotten to her. Elena pressed on, explaining her theory. Esperanza had an undeniable connection to Caio. What if they could use that connection somehow? Perhaps the horse could lead them to evidence that could bring down the trafficking ring, or provide a distraction that could give them an edge. To her surprise, Detective Ortiz didn't immediately dismiss the idea. "At this point, Dr. Suarez, I'm willing to consider any option, but how exactly do you propose we use a horse in a criminal investigation?" That question led to a series of intense planning sessions. Elena worked with animal behaviorists, police tacticians, and even a few unorthodox consultants to develop a strategy. The plan that emerged was risky, unconventional, and possibly their best shot at bringing down the criminal organization and ensuring Caio and Lucia's safety once and for all. The core of the plan revolved around using Esperanza as bait. They would stage a public event, showcasing the hero horse that had rescued an abandoned baby. The story had already garnered significant media attention, and they hoped to use that to their advantage. The traffickers, desperate to find Lucia and eliminate any threats to their operation, would likely be watching. Elena would be there, ostensibly to speak about Esperanza's heroic act. In reality, she would be wired and surrounded by undercover officers. The hope was that the traffickers would make a move, revealing themselves and providing the evidence needed to bring them down. As the day of the event approached, Elena felt a mix of terror and determination. She spent hours with Esperanza, re-establishing their bond and preparing for what was to come. The horse seemed to sense the importance of their task, standing tall and alert during their training sessions. The morning of the event dawned bright and clear. Elena dressed carefully, hiding her nerves behind a professional facade. As she approached Esperanza's stall, she felt a calm settle over her. The horse nickered softly, nuzzling her hand. "We're going to finish this, girl," Elena whispered. "For Caio, for Lucia, for all the others they've hurt." The park where the event was to be held was bustling with activity. News vans lined the streets, and a crowd had already gathered. Elena led Esperanza to a small staging area, her eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of threat. Detective Ortiz approached, his face grim. "Are you ready, Dr. Suarez? There's still time to call this off." Elena took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I'm ready. Let's do this." As she stepped up to the podium, Esperanza by her side, Elena felt the weight of countless lives on her shoulders. She began to speak, recounting the night she had found Caio and Esperanza. As she talked, she noticed a flurry of movement in the crowd. A man was pushing his way forward, his hand reaching into his jacket. Time seemed to slow. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she realized this was the moment they had been waiting for, but before anyone could react, Esperanza suddenly reared up, her powerful forelegs pawing at the air. The crowd gasped, cameras flashed, and in the chaos, Elena saw Detective Ortiz and his team converge on the man. What happened next was a blur of shouting, running, and confusion. Elena found herself pulled to safety by a uniformed officer, watching in awe as Esperanza seemed to herd the panicked crowd, creating a path for the police to pursue their suspect. Hours later, as the dust settled, Elena sat in a debriefing room, still trying to process what had happened. Detective Ortiz entered, a rare smile on his face. "We got them, Dr. Suarez," he announced. "The man at the event was just the tip of the iceberg. His arrest led us to their entire operation. Lucia's testimony, combined with the evidence we gathered today, will be enough to shut them down for good." Elena felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "And Caio, Lucia." "Safe," Ortiz assured her. "They can come out of hiding now. It's over." As the impact of his words sank in, Elena felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. It was over. Caio and Lucia were safe. The nightmare that had consumed her life for months was finally coming to an end. But as she left the police station that evening, heading to the animal shelter to check on Esperanza, Elena realized that this end was also a beginning. Her life had been irrevocably changed by a baby left in a garbage dump and a horse who defied explanation. As she approached Esperanza's stall, she heard a familiar voice. Lucia was there, Caio in her arms, both of them greeting the horse who had brought them together. The sight filled Elena with a warmth she couldn't quite explain. "Elena!" Lucia exclaimed, her face lighting up. "We wanted to surprise you, to thank you, and Esperanza, for everything." Elena joined them, wrapping her arms around Lucia and Caio, feeling Esperanza's soft muzzle against her back. In that moment, she knew that the bonds they had forged could never be broken. As they stood there, an unlikely family brought together by extraordinary circumstances, Elena realized that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, helping Lucia rebuild her life, navigating their unique co-parenting situation, and ensuring Caio grew up knowing how loved and wanted he was. But for now, in the quiet of the stable, with the gentle sounds of Esperanza's breathing and Caio's soft coos, Elena allowed herself to simply be present. They had weathered the storm and emerged stronger for it. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The months following the dramatic takedown of the trafficking ring were a time of healing and adjustment for Elena, Lucia, and little Caio. The world they now inhabited was vastly different from the one they had known before, filled with new challenges but also unprecedented opportunities. Lucia, free from the shadow of her past, threw herself into building a new life with a determination that impressed everyone around her. With Elena's support and the resources provided by victim support services, she enrolled in community college courses, her eyes set on a degree in social work. Her experiences had left deep scars, but they had also ignited a passionate desire to help others who had faced similar struggles. "I want to be for others what you were for me, Elena," Lucia confided one evening as they sat on Elena's porch, watching Caio toddle around the small garden. "Dear lifeline, a second chance." Elena felt a surge of pride for the young woman who had become like a sister to her. "You're already doing that, Lucia. Every day, just by surviving, by thriving, you're showing others that it's possible." Their unique co-parenting arrangement, initially viewed with skepticism by some, had evolved into a harmonious balance. Caio split his time between Elena's cozy apartment and the small but cheerful flat Lucia had obtained near her college. The little boy, now approaching his second birthday, was growing into a curious, affectionate child whose laughter could light up a room. Elena had returned to her work at the animal shelter, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The publicity surrounding Esperanza's role in Caio's rescue had brought unprecedented attention to the shelter. Elena leveraged this interest to launch new programs, including one that paired rescue animals with trauma survivors. Esperanza, of course, was the star of this initiative. The horse's gentle demeanor and intuitive connection with people made her a natural therapy animal. Elena would never forget the day she watched Esperanza interact with a group of rescued trafficking victims, the horse's calm presence soothing frayed nerves and offering wordless comfort. But life, as Elena was learning, had a way of throwing curveballs when least expected. It was a crisp autumn morning when she received a call that would once again alter the course of her life. "Dr. Suarez." The voice on the other end belonged to Maria Gonzalez from Child Services. "We have a situation I think you should be aware of." Elena's heart raced, her mind immediately going to Caio. "Is everything okay? Is Caio all right?" "Caio is fine," Maria assured her quickly. "This is about well, it's about his biological father." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. In all the chaos and joy of the past 2 years, the question of Caio's paternity had never been raised. Lucia had never mentioned the father, and everyone had assumed he was out of the picture. "His father?" Elena repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Maria sighed heavily. "A man has come forward, claiming to be Caio's biological father. He's requesting a paternity test, and, if it's positive, he wants to be part of Caio's life." The news hit Elena like a physical blow. She thought of Caio, of the stable life they had built for him, of Lucia's progress. How would this new development affect everything they had worked so hard to achieve? With shaking hands, Elena called Lucia, asking her to come over immediately. As they sat in Elena's living room, Caio playing contentedly at their feet, Lucia's face grew pale as she listened to the news. I never thought he'd find us," Lucia whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Sorry, I didn't even know if he knew about Caio." Elena reached out, taking Lucia's trembling hands in her own. "Who is he, Lucia? What aren't you telling me?" The story that unfolded was one of youthful naivety and betrayal. The man, Marco, had been Lucia's boyfriend before she was trafficked. He had promised to help her start a new life in the city, only to hand her over to the trafficking ring. Lucia had discovered she was pregnant shortly after, but by then, Marco had disappeared. "I don't know if he was part of the ring or just a pawn," Lucia said, tears streaming down her face. But how can he want to be part of Caio's life now, after everything? The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal consultations and emotional discussions. The paternity test confirmed that Marco was indeed Caio's biological father, opening up a Pandora's box of legal and ethical questions. Marco, it turned out, claimed to have been unaware of Lucia's fate or his son's existence. He had, he said, been trying to make amends for his past mistakes and wanted to take responsibility for his child. His sincerity was difficult to gauge, and Elena found herself torn between skepticism and a grudging acknowledgement that people could change. As the adults grappled with this new reality, Caio remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding him. His world was still one of unconditional love, split between Mama Lucia and Mama Elena, with frequent visits to his beloved Esperanza. It was during one of these visits to the stable, as Elena watched Caio giggle while Esperanza gently nuzzled his hair, that clarity finally came to her. She realized that their unconventional family had weathered storms before, and they could weather this one too. Elena called a meeting with Lucia, Marco, and their respective lawyers. as they all sat around her dining room table, tension thick in the air. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "We're all here because we want what's best for Caio," she said, her voice steady. "And I think we all know that what's best for him is to have as much love and support in his life as possible." She outlined a plan, a shared custody arrangement that would allow Marco to build a relationship with his son while maintaining the stability Caio had with Lucia and Elena. It wouldn't be easy, and it would require trust and cooperation from everyone involved. But it was a chance to turn a potential crisis into an opportunity for growth. To Elena's surprise, both Lucia and Marco agreed to try. The coming months were a delicate dance of supervised visits, family therapy sessions, and careful negotiations. There were setbacks and arguments, moments of doubt and frustration, but there were also breakthroughs. The first time Caio called Marco Papa. The day Lucia and Marco managed to have a civil conversation about Caio's future. The afternoon they all spent at the park, watching Caio play without a care in the world. As Caio's third birthday approached, Elena found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them all to this point. She thought of that cold night when Esperanza had appeared with a tiny bundle on her back, of the fears and challenges they had faced, of the bonds that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. The birthday party was a small affair, held in the backyard of Elena's house. Caio, resplendent in a party hat, was surrounded by his unique family. Lucia, radiant in her role as a mother and student. Marco, still finding his footing but genuine in his desire to be a good father. And Elena, the unexpected guardian, who had opened her heart to a child in need. As they sang Happy Birthday, Elena felt a gentle nudge at her back. She turned to see Esperanza, who had wandered over from her temporary paddock in the yard. The horse's wise eyes seemed to hold a depth of understanding that Elena couldn't quite fathom. In that moment, watching Caio blow out his candles, surrounded by people who loved him fiercely and unconditionally, Elena felt a profound sense of peace. Their family might not look like what she had once imagined, but it was real, it was strong, and it was theirs. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Elena found herself alone with Esperanza. She stroked the horse's neck, overwhelmed with gratitude for the series of events that had led her to this point. "Thank you," she whispered to Esperanza, feeling slightly foolish but utterly sincere, "for bringing him to me, for everything." Esperanza nickered softly as if in response, and as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Elena knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, an unlikely family bound by love, resilience, and the extraordinary events that had brought them together. The story of the abandoned baby, the heroic horse, and the determined woman who brought them all together had captured hearts across the city. But for Elena, Lucia, Marco, and little Caio, it wasn't just a story. It was their life, complex and beautiful, challenging and rewarding. As night fell and stars began to twinkle in the sky, Elena looked around at her makeshift family, Lucia cradling a sleepy Caio, Marco helping to clean up, and Esperanza standing guard over them all. She smiled, knowing that while their journey had been unconventional, it had led them exactly where they needed to be. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its bumps and turns, but Elena was no longer afraid. They had weathered storms before, and they would do so again. Because in the end, it wasn't blood or circumstance that made a family. It was love, commitment, and the courage to open one's heart to unexpected possibilities. As she closed the gate to Esperanza's paddock for the night, Elena whispered a quiet promise to herself and to the universe that had brought them all together, to always cherish the miraculous chain of events that had led to this moment, and to face whatever came next with the same courage, compassion, and open-heartedness that had guided them so far. The adventure that had begun with an abandoned baby and a heroic horse had transformed into something even more extraordinary, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the boundless capacity of the heart to love, heal, and grow. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.